I'd like to welcome Professor Laurence Kotlikoff, Larry, to his friends, professor of economics at Boston University and expert on Social Security. Welcome to the Glenn Show, Larry.
Great to be back with you, Glenn.
Yeah, this is Glenn Loury of Brown University and bloggingheads.tv. And we are here to talk about the large social insurance program for the elderly called Social Security, Larry, which is motherhood and apple pie, FDR, the center of the American welfare state, a commitment to take care of our elders. I hear that you're exercised about the financial integrity of the Social Security system, and I wish you could tell us why.
Well, I'm really exercised about a whole bunch of things about Social Security. Although I'm a big supporter of what it's trying to do, I think we
Yeah.
need to require people to save and to have insurance, which it also provides to children and widows, widowers. But the system, to begin with, is 32% underfinanced. So it's in worse financial shape than Detroit, than Detroit's pension systems when you put them together. Uh, this is not my estimate. This is the Social Security trustees' actuarial estimate, which shows up in Table 4B6 of the trustees' report. If you look at the 2013 trustees' report of the Social Security system, you'll see this estimate of a $23 trillion unfunded liability. This is calculating over what's called the infinite horizon, the long term. And as you know, this is what we economists call the intertemporal budget constraint of Social Security. And we don't believe you should look out 5 years or 10 years. So you have to look out over the entire long term. Of course, you discount, as in make less of, obligations that are way off in the future, informing a present value, a value in the present of these obligations. But these are obligations net of all the taxes that are projected to come in. And people that are now being born are going to get benefits after 75 years. So we can't stop after looking at the problems beyond 75 years or 50 years or any fixed date. Anyway, when you do the calculation that they do, in their report, in Table 4B6, you see a $23 trillion liability, which means that you need to have a 32% hike in payroll taxes for Social Security. That's 4 cents on the dollar that of covered earnings up to $117,000. So if we were to raise the payroll tax, it would mean that almost every American would pay 4 cents more per dollar earned and get nothing back at all in extra benefits. That's what's required to cover the benefit commitments that have been made so far. So the
Okay,
system is completely broke.
let me make sure I understand. I am an economist, but I'm not an expert on Social Security. So here's how I'm understanding what you're saying, and I wonder if you can correct if I say this incorrectly. And that is that right now, the cash flow for Social Security that's coming in the door relative to what's going out the door is above water. But if we look forward, given the law on the book and the benefits that are promised, and given reasonable assumptions about, I don't know, mortality, population growth, the way that wages will change over time, and so forth, the system is indeed underwater by the amount that you've said, $23 trillion dollars in unfunded liability, which, if it were to be remedied, this underfunding, not talking about being able to pay the checks today, tomorrow, or next year, or even in 5 or 10 years, but forever, if it were to be mended, would require us today to raise the tax on wages that fund Social Security by 4 cents on the dollar, and to keep it up, the incremental 4 cents, in perpetuity. Were we to do that, we would then calculate that over the longest of long runs, what we have to pay out in Social Security benefits and what we're going to be taking in Social Security taxes would indeed balance out. Do I understand the
Yeah,
situation correctly?
that's exactly right. And you know, it may seem crazy to people who are watching this that we would look out at liabilities that the government is going to owe 80 years, 90 years from now. But again, they're being discounted in the analysis that the Social Security actuaries are doing. So a dollar 90 years from now has a very small present value compared to a dollar 5 years from now. So we're properly weighting those future commitments. And the fact that the government has, you know, positive cash flow right now is pretty, it's not a reasonable measure of anything. The government's, at the same time it's taking in money, to cover current liabilities. It's also making promises associated with those liabilities that aren't being recorded. So Madoff, had a positive cash flow for many years.
Right.
It doesn't tell you anything, right?
I see what
Yeah.
you're saying. Okay, so now a question
Yeah.
occurs to me, which is if this information is in, if it's really in table 4B6 of the actuaries, the trustees report on the Social Security system, how is it possible that nobody except you is talking about this? How come no politicians? I mean, why isn't this a Republican talking point? For example, the Social Security system is bankrupt. I know not today, but if you look at the right way, it's bankrupt. And these guys in the Democratic Party just want more benefits and blah, blah, blah. Why isn't anybody talking about it?
Well, this is a dereliction of duty. They're supposed to be taking care of the system and of all the claimants, and they're not doing their duty because they don't want to say the emperor has no clothes because it's politically inexpedient. They'll be fired by nobody wants to hear bad news, especially if you're on the receiving side. You don't want to take any benefit cuts. What we're talking about here, if we were to cut benefits, rather than raise taxes by 32% immediately and permanently, but to cut benefits, it requires a 22% immediate and permanent benefit cut. So my 94-year-old mom would have to have her Social Security check every month cut 22%. For the pensions in Detroit, they need perhaps a 15% immediate and permanent benefit cut. So Social Security is in far worse fiscal shape than Detroit's pension funds. And the system is actually bankrupt. So why aren't the politicians, forget the politicians, look at the trustees. They don't even, in their introduction to this document, the trustees report, these are all political appointees as far as I know. These trustees don't even mention Table 4B6, which is right there in the back, hidden in the back of their report, showing how bankrupt the system is. So, and they don't mention it. So they're not doing their duty either. This is an ongoing Ponzi scheme. Both parties are engaged in it. They've all contributed to taking from young people, giving to old people, and leaving these liabilities that they have promised young people when they take the money off the books. So we have most of our obligations are off the books. The Social Security is 32% underfinanced after you incorporate include the taxes that are there to pay for it. The U.S. federal government as a whole, taking into account all the operations, including Social Security, but Medicare, Medicaid, defense spending, you name it, every single expenditure that's projected versus every single tax, the U.S. government is 57% underfinanced. So we don't have a $23 trillion problem. At the overall level, we have a $205 trillion problem. So the country is absolutely broke because of this bogus accounting. Shakespeare said in one of his plays, "First shoot the lawyers."
Richard III.
It was Richard III that he said that in, but
Yeah.
what he should really have said is, "First shoot the accountants." And the accountants and the actuaries have played a part, not the Social Security actuaries because they're doing their job, but in general, the accounting and actuarial profession have engaged in enabling this entire Ponzi scheme. If you look at the accountants who were, quote, helping Detroit manage its pension fund over the decades, they were basically lying. And every state and local government has been doing fraudulent accounting, really, when it comes to valuing the liabilities of the pension funds.
Okay,
And
let's.
that's why,
Let's. I want to talk
yeah.
about that a little bit more detail because these numbers are astounding. Hundreds of trillions of dollars. The government of the United States of America is insolvent. That's what you just said. That's what I heard you say. That
Yeah,
the
that's
government of the
absolutely true.
United
Yeah,
States of America is insolvent.
right.
And that's a startling claim. So I'd like to understand what the accounting sleight of hand, you say underfunding, understating what the liabilities or obligations of government to pay are when they make statements about the fiscal health of the United States of America or of the Social Security Fund. What
Right.
exactly is going on in the accountancy that
So how does it work?
hides
Okay,
these realities from our
sure.
eyes?
Okay, so Glenn, let's pretend I'm Uncle Sam, and I come to you this year and I take, let's say, $10,000, and and I promise to pay you back $20,000 in 5 years. Now, I can say that I borrowed the $10,000 from you, in which case that $10,000 shows up on the books as extra debt, official debt. Or I can say, Glenn, I'm going to call this money, this $10,000 I take from you, taxes, but don't worry about that, because in 5 years you're going to get $20,000. I'm going to make a transfer payment to you of $20,000. So just that choice of words, which is not an economic thing, it's just a language thing, keeps that liability to you off the books. So it's just a matter, the government has
If you call it a tax, then it looks like income to the government balanced by the promised expenditure 5 years later, rather than an indebtedness of the government.
Yeah, but the standard cash flow accounting doesn't put the 5-year expenditure in the future on the books. So what we've done is kept, just like Madoff kept things off the books, and Enron, well, more Enron than Madoff. Madoff just didn't show anybody in his books, but Enron had all these liabilities in the future that they were keeping off the books. They were hiding. Uncle Sam taught Enron how to do that, and Uncle Sam taught Madoff how to do his scheme. I mean, this has gone on, and I'm not the only economist who thinks that we should do what we call fiscal gap accounting, this infinite horizon, present value balancing of comparison of all the liabilities, all the expenditure commitments, including official debt service. Compare that with all the taxes that are projected, and do that fiscal gap accounting to see whether the fiscal gap is small or big or negative or whatever. Now, 1,000 economists have endorsed this type of accounting. If you go to www.theinformact.org, that's THEINFORM.org, you'll see 1,000 economists who've endorsed the Inform Act. These economists are from the very, very top universities in the country. They include 16 Nobel Prize winners have endorsed the Inform Act. The Inform Act requires the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and the GAO, the General Accountability Office, to do fiscal gap accounting on a routine basis. So we have, in effect, the entire economics profession, with the exception of Paul Krugman and some other extremists on both sides of the aisle, endorsing honest accounting, honest fiscal accounting. Where, in effect, the economics profession is saying, look, Uncle Sam has been lying about his books for decades, and it's time to end that, because the country's going over a cliff.
This is very interesting. Now, hold on a minute. Why is Krugman not willing to affirm the importance of an accurate assessment of the real fiscal condition of the country?
Well, Paul sees some people that are unemployed, and there absolutely are lots of people that are unemployed. It's not just some, and it's a big problem, and there are lots of reasons for it. But his view is, well, all you need to do is spend more money, and in other words, increase the expenditure liability, and the economy will respond, and it will produce so much extra output and revenue as to pay for this expenditure on its own. So that's black magic. That's economic magic from the left. Now we have
but hold on a minute.
Wait.
Just hold on a minute, Larry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I understand. On the left, you have Paul Krugman, who believes in Keynesian pump priming to get the economy's employment rate up and income generated, and is willing to spend money even if it puts the government in deficit in order to do so. Whereas on the Republican conservative side, you've got people who say if we cut taxes, it looks like we're going to run a deficit, but the economy will be stimulated by the incentives, the so-called supply siders, and that will solve our problems. But the question I asked you was why a guy like Paul Krugman would, regardless of his policy preferences, not want to know and have everybody else know what the actual fiscal condition of the government's budget is, which doesn't resolve the question of whether or not you pump prime or you do a supply side policy. It's just a question of knowing what the facts are.
Well, if you look at the facts honestly, it leads you, you see a hole so deep that you wouldn't want to dig that hole deeper. The first instinct is not to start spending more money and cut more taxes when you've got a $205 trillion fiscal gap. So he doesn't want to have that information made public. So he'll say, no, but the infinite horizon is looking out long term is ridiculous. Nobody knows what will happen. The world will have
But Larry,
in,
that is a
invaded.
terrible indictment. That's a terrible indictment of someone who writes a major column in a major newspaper, commenting on as
Yeah.
an expert, as a Nobel laureate, commenting on our public affairs, to cooperate in perpetuating an illusion in order to have his way politically. If what you say is true about Dr.
Yeah.
Krugman, then that's a
Well,
terrible
I don't want
indictment.
to.
It's a statement about his integrity. No, I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to turn this into an anti-Paul Krugman because I'm not anti-Paul. But I mean, if what you say is true, it really doesn't speak well for his integrity.
Well, he might believe strongly that he has the right magic secret, and I think he does. I don't know that he's thinks that he's lying to himself, but 1,000 economists, there's 16 Nobel Prize winners, doesn't include Paul, who think otherwise. They think that this information needs to be made public, and so and Social Security has other major problems that he and other adherents to the system aren't addressing or aren't mentioning. We have a system that has been built up over 6 decades. It's got 2,728 rules. It's got tens of thousands of rules explaining these rules,
This is
and nobody
Social
can.
Security that you're talking about.
Yeah, Social Security, and
Okay.
because we started on that, and unless you want to keep talking about the fiscal gap,
No, no, let's go.
This
Complexity of
system
Social
is so
Security.
complex that nobody
Mhm.
can really follow it. Nobody has any idea what they're going to get back, or whether it's some people are overvaluing what they're going to get, other people are undervaluing it, and it's very capricious. If you learn about the system, if you know exactly what to do, you can make a lot more money than if you don't. So
Wow.
I and others have developed software to try and help people figure out what to do with Social Security. And so I know all the ins and outs of these rules. I've been writing a column for the PBS NewsHour every Monday for over a year, going on a year and 3/4 now, explaining these rules. And we get 50 questions a week coming in,
Yeah.
answering questions, and it's extremely complicated. In other words, let me just tell you this, Glenn, the basic formula for benefits at age A of a married spouse is mathematically represented by 10 functions. So if you have benefits at age A on the left-hand side of the equation, on the right-hand side, you're going to see 10 mathematical functions. One's in 4 dimensions. Some of these functions have got minimum and maximum functions in them, inside them. Very complicated extra equations that are restricting the variables that can enter into these functions. So this is just, you could not make anything more complicated. The code to calculate the benefits for this system is longer than the code to code up the federal income tax. It's more
Let me ask.
complicated than the federal income tax.
Okay, Larry. Very, very complicated,
Right.
financially insolvent, politically untouchable. And what this is triggering in my mind, okay, and maybe Dr. Krugman at the New York Times has got a point. If you frame the question this way, the instincts of people will be to pull back. What it's making me think is, my God, some of these people who fear the implications of the growth of government and one program after another, President Obama's health reform comes to mind, are not nuts. They have a point. The point is that there's something inexorable about this, machine, which is the state, that gets ever and ever more intrusive, ever and ever more burdensome, ever and ever more opaque and non-transparent. It's just like got a kind of momentum that gets on, and it is something that one should regard with skepticism. One should regard with caution, rather than the cheerleading. The government is our friend. Let's have another program. Oh, so what if taxes go up? Our taxes are lower than they are in Sweden, and they haven't, et cetera, et cetera. One perhaps more prudently should say, look at what we've wrought. Do we really want to do it again and again? Is it too late to begin to think about how we're going to pull back? I mean, I'm sorry if I sound like a right-wing ideologue, but what you're saying terrifies me, and it makes me very uncomfortable about the implications of more and more and more government. So where am I
Well,
going
it's
wrong?
I don't think it's right wing versus left wing. I think it's just common sense. You don't want to have policies that don't work, that can't be paid for, that nobody can understand, that treat some people, the same type of people, entirely differently just by caprice. These are horribly designed systems. We've got 535 members of Congress. Not a single one of them has a PhD in economics.
Okay,
So
but
they've made a complete mess.
the only people saying what you just got through saying about Social Security have an R next to their name, as far as I can tell.
Well, yeah, and that's a shame, but and they're not expressing themselves properly because, first of all, they've helped produce this program over time,
Sure.
the way it's been set up, and they haven't said, look, here's what we don't want to pull out the rug from under older people in fixing this thing, but we don't want to perpetuate a system with 2,728 rules and tens of thousands of other rules to explain them that nobody can deal with. So we need to fix it. We need to understand what the legitimate purposes of the system are and make sure we can redesign something from scratch for younger people that is equitable and progressive and works and is fully funded. And I have put together that proposal, which has been endorsed by a lot of economists. If you look at thepurpleplans.org, you'll see a proposal for how to fix Social Security from scratch for younger people that does exactly what I just said and still pays off the benefits to current beneficiaries.
All right, I'll
Now,
bite. I'll bite. Tell me a little bit about the
okay,
proposal. Tell us a little bit about the
okay.
proposal.
Well, okay. So what it does is it freezes the current system in place. It fills zeros in people's earnings records after the date of the reform, and the what this means is that the people that are collecting and will collect in the near term and are going to get fully back what they've accrued in benefits as they are retired. So the old system is in effect retired, but it acknowledges the way it would be shut down would not take away anything from anybody that's been accrued. And then at the margin, everybody would be forced to put 8% of their pay into a personal account. But before it got there, it would be divided 50-50 between spouses so that if somebody got divorced, each spouse would have an equal size account. And the government would make matching contributions on behalf of the low-income contributors so that we would have a progressive system. And then all the money in this account, in these accounts, would be collectively invested not by Wall Street but by a government computer in a global market-weighted index fund of stocks and bonds and real estate at zero cost to the participants. And the government would guarantee that this investment would yield at least a zero return after inflation, so that when people got to retirement age, they would have an account balance that was at least equal to what they put in over time, adjusted for inflation. So they could never lose the principal of their contribution. But they wouldn't have any leeway as to how the money's invested. It would always be fully diversified in safe and risky assets in the global portfolio, subject again to this minimum guaranteed return. And then the government would take the account balances of each participant in a cohort and collectively annuitize that cohort's account balances. In other words, gradually sell off the account balances over 10 years between 57 and 67, and starting at age 62, start paying out annuities to the cohort so that, in other words, it pool all the money together and said, look, if your account balance was twice as large as somebody else's account balance, you're going to get an annuity, a pension that continues until you die, and it's going to be inflation protected. It's going to be twice as big as the other person. But the size of these annuities would be, for each cohort, would be adjusted through time. If the cohort started living longer, then the payout would have to be smaller, but the burden of covering that would not be put onto future generations or younger people. In other words, each cohort would be on its own bottom, ship on its own bottom, and that's how the system would work. You'd have each cohort being fully annuitized, again, at zero cost by the government, by a computer. This whole system could be run by you know how thin an Apple Air computer is. I don't have any of their stock, so I'm not trying to advertise for them,
Yeah,
but this thing is very thin. If you look at the Health and Human Services building, it's an enormous building with
I
thousands
get
of.
it. I get it. So it's very
Okay, we're
simple.
gonna clear
Okay,
out an
so
entire floor of HHS and just have this thing suspended with extremely thin wires so that nobody could see them, and it
uh,
just suspended, and that would run the entire Social Security system with none of the bureaucrats.
come on, this is a brilliant idea for a film, or a kind of economic science fiction,
Right.
which with a political bite, which is precisely we take this huge building. I can see the camera, you know, zooming in on the building. The building is huge, right? There are thousands of employees. There's all kinds of offices, all kinds of computers and paper flowing around and whatnot, and they're doing the government's work. And you replace it with a single laptop suspended from thin wire, you know,
Yeah.
inside of which is the program that, because we've simplified and we've stripped away all the political BS and all of the encrusted, you know, privilege and all of this kind of stuff,
Right.
replaces this bureaucracy. So that's a pleasing image to my mind. As I listen to you, it seems to me that there are a couple of elements of your plan that are absolutely critical and diverge from the current system. And one of them is individual accounts. Okay. In other words, you got your money, I got my money. The government is not promising to pay me with somebody else's money, except to the extent that it gives me the floor underneath my return. And if there were a disastrous decline in the
Right.
value of equities, then the government holds me harmless to that. And that presumably is backstopped by the general public fisc. But beyond
Right.
that, we're on our own, and cohorts are on their own. If life expectancy goes up and so forth, it doesn't require future generations to step in to cover the old folks. The old folks just get less back from what they put in once it's been determined that people in their cohort are living longer. Those all seem to me to be, and moreover, it doesn't become a welfare program for the financial services industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've got a very mechanized investment program here where we don't go out and we don't have people betting with their life savings on what security is going to go up or what security is going to go down. So that people then, when they are in the position of having lost their money, are coming back to the government looking to be bailed out. I like all of that.
Yeah. It's just common sense, and this is why economists have endorsed it. I developed this plan together with Jeff Sachs, who's hardly a right winger, hardly a Republican. If you check out Jeff's writings,
Yeah, Jeff is
uh,
not on the right.
yeah,
That's correct.
yeah, we developed this in the early '90s, and it was endorsed by a number of Nobel Prize winners and about 150 economists at the time. So this is something that economists are like engineers. We look at a problem and we say, okay, here are the objectives. We want something that's fair and progressive and fully funded and rational and doesn't allow people to gamble away their retirements or
Something
leave
out
bills for
there.
their kids. And it's a straightforward solution.
No, it's never going to happen, right? I mean, that would be my sort of gut reaction politically. It's just never going to happen.
Well, I think a lot of things. I never thought there would be a bill in front of Congress called the Inform Act with 1,000 economists endorsing it that says to do honest accounting. And so I see things changing. I'm optimistic. I don't think there's anything else you can be but optimistic if you've got children as you and I do, because we have to be optimistic for them. We have to keep pushing to get these problems fixed. These are economic problems. They're man-made problems. They can be fixed. They can be fixed right now. We don't have to impoverish our children. We don't have to live with systems that don't work, healthcare systems, social security systems, tax systems, financial systems. All these things can be fixed and right away.
Well, it strikes me that as an economist, I know so many things that we know that the world has turned its back on. Okay. I mean, you know, we know about disincentives, we know that it doesn't matter nominally where you levy a tax in order to figure out who's actually paying the tax. We know a lot of things. Okay. But the rhetoric and the narrative of policymaking and politics often gives a blind eye to what it is that we know, and expertise takes a backseat to popularity, to interest, to demagoguery, frankly. And it seems to me that if we are going to be serious analysts and effective analysts of the economic woes, we have to take this political reality seriously. It's not enough just to stand on the sideline as we are wont to do and, point fingers and say, we know that what you're saying is wrong. We know when people are going to just, a majority of the voters are going to affirm policies that we know that are not effective. We have to somehow figure out what the political logic is and find a way of entering into the deliberation that can effectively move political outcomes. And I don't know that having 1,000 economists sign a petition is the way to get that done. Maybe
Yeah.
persuading some influential candidates from either party.
Well, 8 senators have endorsed this bill that's in front of Congress. It was co-sponsored by Democrat Senator Kaine and a Republican Senator Thune. So right now,
This is the Inform Act that
the
you're
Inform
talking
Act.
about?
I think everybody who's listening or watching this needs to get on the phone to their
Yeah.
members of Congress, particularly their senators, and get
So,
this bill
so
passed. Because
Tim Kaine is in favor of fiscal gap accounting for the federal government.
he's one of the co-sponsors. Yeah, he's original
Yeah,
co-sponsor of the Senator
that's
thing.
noteworthy.
Yeah. So, I think we can work with the politicians if we have enough. This is the equivalent of the economics profession, of the physics profession telling Roosevelt via Einstein that we have, the danger of an atomic bomb being built by Germany. This is the economics profession telling the government that we have an economic bomb under our kids' feet that we need to defuse and dismantle. And it's a fiscal time bomb, $205 trillion present value fiscal gap. It's not going to go away. We can't cut taxes 57%. We can't
You mean raise taxes?
raise taxes 57%. We can't cut benefits and other expenditures by 37%. We have to come up with a way that limits the growth of the expenditures and also raises the taxes in a reasonable way, so that and also broadens the base and lowers the rates. There are ways you can actually get lower rates but a broader base, so you have people having an incentive to work. That simplifies the tax system. So there are solutions. We just need to have economists stand up and tell the politicians what to do, because they have no idea.
Well, I think we can end it there, Larry.
Okay.
Economists need to stand up. Economists of the world unite. But thanks for laying out this terrain. I think you do us a service and call our attention to something that's really going to be around for a long time, and we need to start dealing with it. So, yeah, I mean, some benefits are going to get cut and some taxes are going to be raised. I mean, there's no free lunch, right? I mean, there's no way to solve this problem without
There's no magic
reducing
here.
outlays or increasing intake.
Yeah, listening to magicians, whether it's Krugman or Laffer, these guys are magicians, and all of us have got children and grandchildren. We can't depend on black magic. We have to look at realities. We have to balance our books, just like any household has to pay its own bills over its
Thank you
lifetime.
very much, Larry. Thanks for coming on the Glenn Show. I guess we both have to get going this morning, so let's sign off.
Okay, take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.